Hi everyone, it's Movement, Art, and Soul with Karen Sparks. And I am a counselor, an artist, and a movement artist, priestess, an author. I've done numerous things along these lines of personal and spiritual synthesis and growth, evolution, integration, individuation, and basically our personal and spiritual journey. And that's what this channel is all about. In this playlist, I'm talking a little bit more about soul work. And what is soul work? Basically, it's working on your personal spiritual journey on a deeper level. There's so many things about the definition of the word soul that I find interesting. But first, I wanted to mention that that's why I use the word soul counsel. In my counseling method, so I'm sure other people have used this as well, but I haven't seen that. I'm just calling it that myself. And I wouldn't be surprised if other people use the word soul counsel or soul counseling or anything like that, because I feel like that is representing where a number of people feel that we need to put our attention to in the realm of helping and assisting others, which is working on a deeper level than just cognitive, the mind, just that alone, or just the emotions, or just the physical level. I feel that the word soul includes our spiritual aspect and how that spiritual aspect can be representing where we are on our journey and the various different things and triggers and experiences that we can go through in our life just doing our journey through life. You know, this whole idea around working on a soul level just makes so much sense to me. And I think back to the word psychology. I wrote about this many years ago under my old business name. And I wrote about, and there are other people talking about this as well today, which I think is great. Psychology itself is broken down into the word psyche and ology. And so, as I mentioned before on a blog that I did, so for any of you who are finding this that used to follow me in my old business name and my old blog, you'll be familiar with this. Psyche means the soul. It actually comes from Greek, and it's often translated to mean soul, and sometimes even it's translated to mean consciousness. So, psyche being the soul and ology meaning the study of. The word psychology was originally around the study of the soul. And so what I think that alludes to is that we've lost something. We've lost the idea around working with somebody on a deeper soul level. Now, one of the people I'm interested in, Roberto Assagioli, in a method called psychosynthesis. He was around in the early 1900s as a psychiatrist, and he was saying exactly that we need to bring the soul back to psychology. And he was a psychiatrist, so he didn't want to talk about certain things that he was interested in. He had parents who were very spiritually inclined. He was around spiritual circles, and he looked into a number of things that I've also looked into during my own journey. Similar to Jung, he was a lot closer to Jung than in what he did than anybody else, I think, during their times. They were one of the first two pioneers in the realm of working with people and helping them to bring some of these spiritual principles, practices, techniques, and considerations into the realm of psychiatry and psychology and counseling and so on. So none of what the two of them did was new. They both researched, experienced, and went into and delved into these more ancient practices that come from older times, just like the word psychology hints at. You know, and we have these little roots that we can look at in the world. We can always dig and find out where did this really come from? And so this excites me in a way of imagining how psychology was originally intended to really be the study of the nature of the soul and how to help someone. But it has become so rational and cognitive and just textbook oriented. And many people working with others are not on a spiritual journey and don't include that in the practices that they do. So you find different camps now looking for a counselor or a therapist or a spiritual guide, a master teacher, someone to assist you if you're interested in taking and embarking on more along a spiritual personal journey, a synthesis, enlightenment, wholeness, individuation, words like that. And so I find that very interesting because, on one hand, you get the more textbook kind of people. Well, go talk to your doctor if you're feeling depressed. Maybe you need some medication, and here's some cognitive behavioral techniques. And, and it's a lot like very textbook oriented type stuff, which is great. Some of these things work well, like certain techniques around CBT. But what I find is everything's so chopped up, right? And then there's the medication layer, as opposed to looking at some of the things we're experiencing as indicators that we are on a journey and stuff is coming up for us to look at so it can be transformed and seen, and that we need to go into the darker aspect, the shadow of ourself, the unconscious, to look at aspects of ourself that we might not want to see or can't see or don't really understand, things that come from our history, our conditioning, our ancestral patterns, things like that. So some of these older teachers had looked at that, and branches of psychology began to develop, whether it was transpersonal, Jungian psychology, and analytical psychology, energy psychology, lots of different psychologies that now do address the spiritual nature of a person, and maybe even looking at some of the neurotic experiences that we call neurotic, or behaviors or phases that some people seem to be going through could actually be a spiritual crisis. And Assagioli talks about that quite deeply, which I found very interesting, because it sort of relates to the dark night of the soul. So Assagioli talked about how a spiritual crisis can actually mimic something that appears to be a really deeply seated psychological disturbance that a textbook psychologist or psychiatrist, even today, 2021, could give a label for, but it is actually a process for many people that it could be something within them on their journey that they're going through, which leads to these certain types of experiences. I can talk about that on another playlist sometime if anybody's interested. So I do find that quite interesting. So to me, I think it's very important. We do need to separate things like an extreme form of a mental emotional disturbance that could lead somebody to being catatonic or unable to communicate with, or they're not functioning at all in their daily life. Extreme situations need a different kind of approach than what I'm talking about, in terms of perhaps somebody slipping into some anxiety or a phase of depression that's sort of a general thing in their life, like a theme hanging over them, but still they're functioning, but they just feel, people around them may even think there's something terribly wrong with you, maybe you need to go talk to someone. But if they get put on medication or get a label, that may never get addressed. And I think that's the difference that some of these teachers were talking about, is that we're not considering that some of the things that we experience are actually normal things to experience during a crisis, but that crisis could be on a deeper soul level. And that if we address that appropriately, we may find ourselves feeling better quicker. And if not quicker, then during a process of whatever it takes to unfold something that we need to see, to develop some aspect of ourselves that we need to develop, to see something that we haven't been dealing with that's been stuffed away inside, creating havoc in our daily life that we're not attending to. Things like that. So I do find that in soul work, in my own journey personally, I've come across some of these older teachings. So for me personally, my soul work includes other things, not just the psyche aspect in terms of, let's say, not a deep layer talking about the psyche, because these things have layers to them too. If I say the word psyche, I can just think of so many layers of what that word can mean. So on a more superficial layer, in a term of counseling, that's what I'm saying, is that in terms of counseling, you can start at a certain layer, looking at this soul work that you are coming to take a look at, whether it's some kind of a personal issue or you're searching for soul counsel. that there is something else that we can also look at, which I include in soul work, meaning that there's the body aspect. I think the body is very important in working on a soul level, working on the psyche. And one thing I'd like to mention is that Assagioli, who was the founder of psychosynthesis, was talking about something called biopsychosynthesis in some of his work, meaning that he was along the lines of a yoga, and I think it wasn't a new idea because he was looking into yoga. So biopsychosynthesis just meaning bio, the biology, the body, the physiology, and then the psycho meaning the mind, the psyche, the soul. So bringing it together, synthesis, biopsychosynthesis. So I think he was just taking some of this more Eastern approach in terms of working and realizing how important it is to bring the breath and the body into your work on your psyche, into your work on your soul, into your synthesis, into your path of healing, integration, wholeness, whatever you want to call it. Along the same lines, in soul work, I've studied Jinshin Jutsu, which is an art, you can say it's very similar to acupressure, which I've also studied. And in Jinshin Jutsu, it developed out of Japan, and it has become like a philosophy within itself, an art of living, an art of fun. That is some of the terminology that they use. Two words that I really like that come from Jinshin Jutsu are physio-philosophy and physio-psychology. So they say basically Jinshin Jutsu works on, and it can be called a physio-philosophy when you work certain aspects of it, and a physio-psychology when you work with certain aspects of it, meaning that as you work with the body, with certain energy points and centers on the body, acupressure points, if you want to call them that simply, and acupressure and acupuncture work with many of the points, the same points that are in Jinshin Jutsu. But when you're working with these centers, you're working with the physical body, obviously, but you're working on an energetic level of the physical body. It affects your physiology, and it can affect your mind, the way you think, and it can affect your psychology and the way that you are in the world. With the development of consciousness and awareness, we can come to see what it is we're doing in the world. For example, in Jinshin Jutsu, we talk about certain attitudes that put stresses on certain organs and organ functions and organ flows within the body. So we can tense up when something happens to us, for example, when we feel fearful, we can tense up when we're worried. These different attitudes affect us. And so I really love the idea that soul work is a physio-philosophy. You can work with your soul, you can grow, you can evolve, you can work with your consciousness through the body, through your physiology, through your mind, through your emotions, and deeper into your soul, into connection with spirit. And so I also wanted to mention movement, because as I said, me being a movement artist, an artist, a counselor, priestess, I'm an author too. All of these things, I find it all relates, whether we're writing something, we're thinking of a philosophy, we're working on something within. Movement's really important. And in art, for example, like Kung Fu, Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, any of those teachers that I had that taught me these arts were spiritually inclined and were healers. Those were the kind of people that I tended to attract. People that were interested in this sort of idea, the idea of the evolution of the individual, of connection to the essence of who we really are, of the deeper philosophies, of healing, of wholeness, working with dreams, working with symbols, looking at life as a journey of enlightenment on a continuum of no specific definition, but a evolution. So that yes, we do evolve. We do have levels. We have levels of how we can alter and transform in our life, which lead to certain milestones, which I call it like, if I get to a certain place, then this and this, I should have been able to develop this as an ability. My behaviors ought to have changed. The way that I eat, the way that I think, the way that I speak, where I put my attention, many other milestones, but I don't like the idea of an end point. So we don't just go, oh, you're enlightened now, boing. So I like it more looking at it as a journey and just keep growing. And so therefore, yes, you will hit certain milestones, you will attain certain things, you will develop certain abilities, your consciousness, your conscience, your awareness, all of these things grow, your presence, and your ability to look at the symbols, the dreams, and the experiences of your life through lenses that grow and evolve as you do. So I find that because I had these teachers who were very spiritually inclined, when I did Kung Fu, yes, we did kicks and punches, but it was so fascinating because I loved the way my teacher would say, you're not doing a punch, you're closing a channel here. You do not understand that when you're working with these animals, it's healing. You're working with your meridians, you're working with your energy centers. You know, the Kung Fu and Qigong that we were taught is Kundalini yoga. But it's Kundalini yoga evolved because when we did things, Kundalini yoga has certain ways of practicing. In Kung Fu and Qigong, we were very dynamic and moving, so we didn't just stay in one spot. And sometimes we did stay in one spot. So one of the reasons why I feel that the way that I was taught Kung Fu and Qigong is an evolution of yoga is that yoga is pretty static. It can be dynamic, but it still usually stays on a mat. Now, I do know that there are some old traditions of yoga. They did yoga wrestling, and they did, I've seen some beautiful yoga demonstrations with weapons and kicks and different things, and they weren't just on a mat. So that shows me that, you know, the Kung Fu is like, it's an aligned that evolved through one line of yoga, and then they kind of took it and kept evolving it through their own traditions in their own areas. So even within Kung Fu itself, you have many different types, just like Qigong, just like Tai Chi, just like yoga, just like counselors, just like spiritual paths. And so soul work is also, there is no guarantee. So different people can evolve to a different level, even if they do something for around the same time. So it's not a time thing. This is why when people say certain things to me after everything that I've been through, and as long as I've been through, and I'm so thankful and grateful to my teachers that when somebody says something to me like, oh, so-and-so, that's a real yoga person because so-and-so's been doing it since they were 13, but that doesn't mean anything. And it doesn't mean anything you've started in your 20s or your 30s or your 40s or your 50s. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't even mean anything according to who you were taught by. What counts is, what exactly did you do? How did you do it? How consistent were you? How disciplined were you? What is your natural tendency and personal potential? And how did you apply these things? So, and then how long? So how long does it matter? Well, yes and no. Does it matter who your teacher was? Well, yes and no. And because it's a very interesting and personal thing, so no one can guarantee anyone. Now I understand why. I was told that too when I first began. Nobody can give you any guarantees, right? So I think that it's really interesting to see how all these things relate. So the spiritual movement art. So now you know, when I say I'm a movement artist, it's the spiritual movement arts that I do in my life, and I do them for a very specific reason, and they're all encompassing. So of course, when I don't feel well, I know that there's certain things I can do to help me to feel better. And when I want to quiet my mind, I know what I can do to help me to quiet my mind. And when I want to continue using my arts all the time to grow personally and spiritually, I know that I can do that too. And so I really love how it all fits together. So Soul Counsel makes me think of, again, all the things that I told you about that come from older teachings that people like Jung and Roberto Assagioli, who were more spiritually inclined, they put together into European, Western English words or whatever words. Assagioli wasn't necessarily just pure English from where he came from. But anyways, it's more, I would think, European, that we took older things and then just changed the wording around it. So even if you delve deep into certain spiritual teachings that are very old, you'll find that the collective unconscious is a word that Jung coined, but it exists in older spiritual traditions as a concept that is talked about in a different way. So I think it's really great. Kudos to them for bringing this work out at a time when it wasn't popular. Because even today, 2021, there's many circles that just don't want to look at this kind of work or condone it along these lines. But there are still so many people who are interested in this that I think it's great that we have these teachings available to us, and that soul work is like peeling a layer off an onion, a layer at a time. That's something that I heard from Gestalt when I was studying that modality of counseling, and that is an Eastern metaphor, apparently. So anyway, it is like that. It's like peeling these layers to understand ourselves and to come to the essence of who we really are. And so if you were to say to me, what is soul work? I think that's what it is, peeling off the layers, coming to know ourselves, to understand ourselves, to grow and to evolve on a deeper level so that we can connect with and express the essence of who we really are. And until next time, this is Karen Sparks. Please like and subscribe. And in video number 2, we will look at some of these things on a different, deeper level. Until then, have a great day.